Our next presenter is coming to us from the East Coast because even though he lives in Arizona, he was called away to training. But he's a great friend of mine. His name is Chuck, and even though his thing says Charles, he goes by Chuck. Chuck, thanks for being here, my friend. Take it away, man. This is your show. We look forward to hearing this presentation. This is so real after these riots and stuff that happened. So I'm going to be listening very intently. Thank you for being here.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you, Dr. Dara, for including U.S. Marshals in the BluePaz First Responder Health and Wellness Conference. We're honored to be here. I'm honored to present. Over the last few years, Marshal Service has become more involved in the civil unrest incidents after numerous recent attacks against federal courthouses. Marshal Service has deployed personnel to many of the cities around the country to protect those federal courthouses and the personnel that work inside those courthouses. Today, I'm going to share some of the experiences from the Marshal Service deployment to those cities. Much of what I will share is my personal experience and those of personnel that I've talked to during the deployment and then the redeployment from those cities. Due to some ongoing litigation involving accusations from what law enforcement has described as violent opportunists being injured by law enforcement, and due to various FOIA records requests, I can't discuss too much about the incidents that many of the deputies experienced and the names of the involved cities. So in 2020, the Marshal Service deployed deputies from the U.S. Marshal Service to various cities around the country in response to those numerous situations that required protection of those courthouses. In one particular city, Marshal Service deployed an intelligence team to investigate threats against the courthouse. These threat investigations, the threat investigation support team consisted of 3 deputy U.S. Marshal criminal investigators, 2 intel analysts, and myself as the acting assistant chief. Our mission was to identify threat actors, mitigate threats to the courthouse and the personnel inside, and seek prosecution if necessary. Marshal Service also deployed teams of deputies to provide security for courthouses and for Marshal Service personnel and other court employees, again, to multiple cities. In this one city, the attempted siege of the federal courthouse, at the time, there was no fencing around the building. Therefore, it was fair game. Every night, between the Marshal Service, Federal Protective Service, and U.S. Border Patrol, they defended the courthouse from attempts to take over and potentially burn down the building. During my first night at the courthouse, I wanted to see the front of the courthouse, kind of get a lay of the land and look across the street at the encampments that had been set up and established by these violent opportunists. As I walked down to the front porch of this courthouse, people in the park started yelling at us, saying things like, F you fascist feds, flipping us off. Some even took the opportunity to throw objects at us. And again, at that point, there was no fence, so it was dodge and hide behind the columns. Even though I had knowledge of the many weeks-long protests at this point, I kind of just passed this off as no big deal. I'd later changed my mind with all of that. Because of the curfew that was imposed on personnel inside the courthouse, our days usually started around 1500. We'd get up, get around at the hotel, leave the hotel, head for downtown. We had to stay at hotels that were approximately 30 minutes outside the downtown area, in whichever cardinal direction we had to stay. And that was because most of the violent opportunists and their supporters, they were actively seeking out our hotels where, quote unquote, the feds were staying. Once we arrived at the courthouse, it was usually just go time. You got your game face on and you got ready for the night's activities. Violent opportunists were always around the courthouse. They were watching every entrance and exit. They were taking pictures of law enforcement personnel and their vehicles, pointing lasers at our faces. Usually after the 1600 briefing with our partners, it was time to lock down the courthouse. At some point after most of the front windows and cameras and stuff around the courthouse had been broken, facades were built to basically act as makeshift barriers and to prevent people from being able to get through. After we got back to the courthouse and we got locked down, it was time to brief all the personnel that would be in the courthouse that night for the nightly evacuation plan. We come up with evacuation code word. We would brief the administrative or civilian personnel that had to be in the courthouse during this time on our plan for evacuation if the courthouse was overtaken and likely set on fire. Our command post was on the second floor of this courthouse, just above the main entrance, where our deputies set up every night. The main entrance was polluted with CS gas after weeks of deploying the gas on those individuals trying to break into the courthouse. The gas residual was so strong and at times overwhelming on the second floor. So we would have to go up to the higher floors to get away from it or wear our gas masks inside most of the night while we were working. Between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night, a large group of moms would gather every evening. They'd be outside, they'd be chanting and exercising their right of assembly in front of the courthouse. When the moms showed up, we knew that it was about to be, things were going to start changing. The moms would out front, they'd chant, they'd lock arms, they'd be out there for a while, hour, maybe 2 hours. And then we knew the time was growing near when the outside would then turn into basically a combat zone. We would have to go around the office, closing the blinds, turning off unnecessary lights, and closing the doors so the people on the outside couldn't see our folks on the inside moving around. This was just to reduce the number of attempts to injure the feds on the inside. If they couldn't see us, they didn't break out the windows we were sitting near in the offices that we were trying to work out of. At this time, the VOs were the violent opportunists. Sorry, the VOs were using wrist-mounted slingshots to hurl. And we estimated with some of the ball bearings that we saw, they were about 1-inch round ball bearings that they were shooting at the windows if they saw people moving around. On one particular night, we were up in a higher floor discussing some tactics things, what we would potentially charge people with if they got into the building, injuring our deputies. And as we walked through the higher floors, we started hearing windows being smashed. And so we had to hurry up and close the doors, turn off the lights, basically get down because we knew they were hurling these 1-inch steel ball bearings at the windows. So around 2300 at night, most of the actual protesters had left the courthouse and the surrounding area. And those remaining, those are the individuals set out on causing damage and mayhem. Many of the tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, as it's commonly known, were meant to cause injury to law enforcement and to potentially get the violent opportunists to get control over the courthouse. As we learned in the coming days, many of our deputies were being followed from their hotel, and then again when they departed the courthouse the next morning to return to their hotel. And many of these deputies, they were putting in 16, 18-hour days and nights. On one occasion, we learned the manager of one of the local hotels that these deputies were staying at in the downtown area was providing the information to some of the violent opportunists related to the hotel, that particular hotel that they were staying in. And because of the security concerns, we had to immediately move those deputies out to another hotel. And again, this is after these guys working the 16 hours under brutal physical and mental conditions every night at this particular courthouse. When our intel team got in place to this location, we worked with another agency to get a temporary flight restriction in place around this courthouse due to the number of drones that we're seeing flying in and around the courthouse, over top the courthouse. at this point, we knew we needed some kind of flight restriction to protect some of the citizens on the ground and our law enforcement officers. This temporary flight restriction, or TFR, violated numerous times by many unlicensed drone operators. We were able to work with one of the other law enforcement agencies who was able to deploy a counter drone system, which allowed them to locate many of the drone operators, put down their drones, and then be able to deal with that unlicensed drone operator and their violations of the flight restriction. Fortunately, none of the drones that were intercepted had the capability of dropping any kind of items that would be a danger to citizens or law enforcement officers on the ground. On this next slide, the picture shown is of an individual who struck one of our deputies in the head with a small sledgehammer. And this occurred as the team was exiting the building to prevent these individuals from getting in. At that point, they were trying to force entry into the building through the facade walls that were built and doorways. Fortunately, the deputy was wearing his helmet and only sustained minor injuries. Unfortunately, the charges against this particular subject were later dropped. On the next slide, in the picture to the left, a deputy is about to get struck with a baseball bat across his back while the deputy and some of his partners were making an arrest. They were arresting an individual who had been shining a laser into their faces while they were out trying to push back these individuals from getting into the courthouse. The picture on the right side of the slide was captured from a video posted on social media within minutes of this deputy being struck. If you look closely, there's no bat in that photo. The bat had actually been edited out of the photo within minutes of being posted on one of the streaming services. Fortunately, we were able to find that video. We were able to capture that video as evidence and use it as part of a prosecution for the suspect who struck the deputy with that bat. After this deputy was struck, we focused most of our attention, at least myself and the intel team, we focused most of our attention on identifying and locating the subject. The subject was later identified and arrested by our folks, and then he was arrested and charged on federal assault charges. As we were reviewing the subject's social media sites, we located a photo of the subject holding a semi-auto handgun near the front entrance of this courthouse, just prior to all the rioting that was taking place. This photo was used to bring federal charges against this subject for possessing a prohibited weapon on federal property. The photo on the bottom left is where the bat struck the deputy's arm. Fortunately, the deputy's vest took the brunt of the force when the bat struck him. On the next slide, the violent opportunists were just standing around, chanting for justice. They were ready to inflict injury on Leos. They used commercial grade fireworks, batons, pepper spray, bear spray. They had gloves with hard knuckles and spikes, and numerous other garments that they were wearing at the time. Several of these individuals had concealed firearms, and when they were taken into custody and brought into the building, we located several firearms on them, amongst various other things. And these commercial grade fireworks, it literally sounded like bombs going off every time they were thrown at the building or into the building. And we had several that made it inside the doorways that were built for our deputies to be able to get out and push back these individuals. And unfortunately, we had several of our deputies injured when these fireworks went off. The violent opportunists also used hockey sticks to basically throw back or hit back the gas canisters that were being deployed to get them to push back away from the building. Leaf blowers, whether gas or electric, they were used as well. They were very popular to blow the gas back onto our deputies and our other law enforcement partners. As our deputies were out on the front porch, or we were pushing back these individuals from the building, we had many different items thrown at us, whether they were cans of vegetable. Some vegetable cans were actually frozen, frozen water bottles, rocks, bottles filled with urine, feces, paint. We also found some photos and videos where they were filling the water fire extinguisher cans with gasoline. Some were filled with gasoline and paint. That as they came up to the this courthouse, and at this time there was the fencing put up, but they would come up to the fencing and they would stick the water can hose through the fencing and try to spray it into law enforcement officers' faces. During this whole deal, there were more than 300 law enforcement officers who suffered eye injuries from the individuals using lasers. They were using green, red, blue. Some of the confiscated lasers were actually military grade lasers used to guide in aircraft for various military purposes. Deputies were, some of the other issues that we dealt with too were our deputies were not able to get their laundry cleaned. Couldn't get to laundromats. Some of the hotels, just because they weren't law enforcement friendly, couldn't use the wash and dryer. So our deputies were washing their clothes out of the sinks. Every night they were getting coated in CS gas. I had to wear most of that same stuff back the next day. And many of our deputies, they were in this city for well over a month. So obviously you're limited in your clothing items and your tactical gear. It's covered. And as most of us know, you just can't throw that stuff in the washer every night and get it back in service for the next day. During the initial start to this unrest, many of the deputies were only getting one meal a day. I remember getting to the courthouse every evening. We'd go get food and then we'd come back and that was it. We wouldn't get to eat till the next morning, unless we brought some snacks with us. When we returned to our hotels, usually it was a breakfast that consisted of a brown bag breakfast with maybe a fruit, a yogurt, maybe a breakfast bar or something. That's usually about all we had. It was difficult for us to get out to the grocery stores. If we went into any of the stores, we would have to kind of cover ourselves up. They were always watching. We always had people standing outside the hotels. They were looking for us. They'd follow us. We had some of our specialty units that they would monitor our travels using some of our other techniques. We had planned routes. We had certain routes that we had to take back just to ensure we weren't being followed. We had told many of the deputies that were there that they had to stay off social media. We know that a lot of these folks were trying to find law enforcement. As they took the pictures, they would try to search social media for them. We told deputies keep their Wi-Fi turned off. We had some information that they were using some kind of like counter phone technology to get into the phones. We noticed that a lot of the equipment that we were using, certain televisions, there was some kind of weird jamming stuff going on. A couple times we shifted our command post, and we noticed that we couldn't make calls, we couldn't send emails through our cell phones. So we're guessing there was some kind of jamming devices being used in the area. So these individuals, again, were also taking pictures of feds at their hotels, posting them on social media in an attempt to identify us, identify our family, our friends, which, not being able to have those communications with your families, your kids back home, it made it tough for a lot of the deputies. They may only get that couple-minute phone call, which, on the back end, that created some problems at home for some of our deputies. On numerous occasions, our deputies had to exit the courthouse to extinguish fires. There's pretty much fires every night. Sometimes they were able to get through the facade wall that was built and toss Molotov cocktails in, start fires on the porch. Anything that they could potentially burn, they were burning it. So we would have to try to reinforce these breached areas with really whatever we had at the time, until the next morning, when most of them went away. They went back over into the encampment, and we could get folks in to fix what had been breached. When our deputies exited the courthouse to try to push back some of the individuals who were attempting to breach the courthouse, they came under instant attack from stuff being pelted at them. Stuff was just literally raining down from across the street, from the left side, from the right side. Many of the deputies and other law enforcement that were there and were injured, and most of these injuries, they went untreated. We couldn't trust the local medical resources. We certainly couldn't trust taking our folks to hospitals. It was a very untrusting environment. It was something I've never experienced before, and I've deployed many places around the world when I was in the military. Some of the city police and fire departments refused to speak with us. We would try to pass intel. There's a couple of times we had intel that there were U-Haul trucks coming in, potentially filled with explosives. We tried passing that on. We would contact that local police department, and as soon as we identified ourselves, they'd hang up. We knew this wasn't the rank and file officers. This was more on the political side, and we just kind of took it in stride. We kept trying to make communications with them. Unfortunately, we didn't get that in return. So don't take anything personal. Yeah, you just move on and get your job done. And like I said, nearly every night there were fires started out on the front part of this courthouse before and even well after this embassy fencing was put up. When the embassy fencing first went up, it wasn't really secured too well. And the first night after the fencing was put up, it was pushed down, it was torn apart. Had company come in, spent a whole lot of money trying to fix this fence, reinforce the fence. I'm sure, as everybody saw on TV, there were a lot of folks coming out with umbrellas. Some of that was to not get hit with some of the not simunition, but some of the less lethal munitions that were being used. And it also shadowed them from using torches and cutters and grinders to cut through that fencing. And prior to the fencing going up around this courthouse, pretty much every night they were able to breach the plywood covering, get stuff into the windows, get stuff into the doors, barricade our folks so we couldn't come out. And being in there, it was almost like they knew what they were doing. They were trying to barricade us in, and then they would toss stuff in to set the building on fire with all of us in the building. These individuals would open up the fire hydrants all the way around the courthouse. even several streets out. We contacted that local fire department to let them know. Again, we just got hung up on. We called them to come out and, hey, we've got some big fires here. We might need some help. Never got a response from them. And again, there was nothing personal. We weren't holding it against the rank and file. Our concern with this is when the fire hydrants were open, how would that affect the fire suppression system for the courthouse? So with that, we used fire extinguishers, and we went through a lot of fire extinguishers to the point where our incident management team, they weren't even able to get any more fire extinguishers into the city. We couldn't get people to come in and fill them up. And the ones we got, we used them up all that night. And there we were. We had fires that we couldn't do anything with. So sometimes you just hope the fire would just burn itself out and they wouldn't pile more stuff into it. That's the way it goes. So what we did was, at that point, our incident management team decided, hey, let's just go buy our fire hose ourselves. We'll connect it to the fire system at the courthouse, and we'll put out the fires ourselves. While this seemed like a great idea, and it was far more efficient than what we were doing, the law enforcement officers fighting the fire, well, they didn't really receive a thorough briefing on how to use that fire suppression. Sorry, I started laughing. They didn't get a thorough briefing on how to use that fire suppression system. And we flooded the basement many a times in that courthouse. So while, again, it was a good idea to be efficient, it wasn't the best idea to have cops with fire hoses who didn't know how to use the fire suppression system. So, and then moving on to the last slide, when it was time for many of the deputies to redeploy back to their offices, we packed up our big Pelican cases with all of our tactical gear, all of our other equipment, but we couldn't get shipping companies to come pick them up. Some just flat out refused. Others were like, hey, we'd like to help, but we don't want to come down there. Obviously, they don't want to put their employees at risk, which we understood. But some of these companies that flat out refused to come down and ship these containers back, that was pretty tough. So some of our deputies, they waited weeks to get their tactical equipment, their regular everyday equipment that they were using back at their duty stations. So it put a strain on the deputies, put a strain on that office's management as well. The Marshal Service did provide various types of support for deputies redeploying from these cities. Overall, and I'm sure many of you on this call have been in these situations. It's tough. There's a lot of stress to it, a lot of uncertainty. Every night you're ramped up the entire time, and then you go home, you try to unwind, you find something to just kind of bring down that adrenaline. So with all this going on around the country, Marshal Service senior management, they face some new staffing and logistical challenges to get our district offices prepared for these incidents. We closely following the news, closely following and working with our local intel partners just to try to be prepared. I think we as an agency are better prepared for when this happens in the future. And hopefully we'll be better partners to our state and local agencies who we've over relied on. And for that, we appreciate your help. With all this in these cities, in some of these cities, and I don't want to say all of them, but in some of these cities, these incidents deeply strained our relationships with some state and local law enforcement agencies. Hopefully, over time, these relationships can be repaired, but we'll see what happens. For myself and many of us who were in these cities, we experienced, I don't want to say trauma, traumatic stuff, but it wreaked havoc on you. Eating once a day, not sleeping very much. When I would get back to the hotel in the morning, sometimes we get back 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. You're just exhausted, and you try to get some sleep, but that constant concern of, okay, who's at the hotel, or did these people follow us? When I got back from the city, it took weeks to get my sleep pattern back to where it needed to be. I was always grumpy. Well, I'm kind of grumpy sometimes now, but it was tough. You're getting yourself back into a routine that you've not been in over a month. So there was some struggles, but we all kind of dealt with it. The agency was pretty good with getting us people to talk to. Our critical incident response folks were made themselves available to all of us if needed. So with that, I mean, that's pretty much the most I can talk about with this. Hopefully you guys can even still hear me. And again, thank you, Dr. Dar, for giving us the opportunity to participate in this and giving me the opportunity to kind of tell the Mark Service story.
Yeah, you're welcome, Chuck. I mean, as you will read here in the comments, this is very important that people hear your perspective on it, because what you guys went through was extremely traumatic. It's not saying that you developed post-traumatic stress disorder from it, but you were exposed to a lot of trauma. And I had some questions for you, and I'd love to hear if anybody else has questions as well, if people wouldn't mind typing those questions. But did it feel at some point like this seems, I know there is a call, is a duty that you have to protect the building, like your orders were straight, right? But did it feel like it wasn't worth it to defend property with your lives when you guys were being barricaded in the building, potentially lit on fire, stuff like that? Did it feel, did anybody want to give up and say, hey, look, this isn't worth it, let's move on, let's talk to somebody who could hear us? I don't know.
Yeah, Dr. I'm sure some people did. I think most of us, we understood what our roles were, and this is really our responsibility every day, is protecting those courthouses and the folks inside, and ensuring that the judicial process continues. And I think for the majority, most of us, we were in it no matter what. And I'm sure that there were some people that said, what are we doing this for, and wanted to throw their hands up. But we stuck it out, and we stuck it out with some other federal partners, and we're very appreciative for their help, because had it not been for some of our other federal partners, we would have lost that courthouse within the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, one of the things that I appreciated about this was you and I were able to stay in contact when you were deployed, and I knew that I wanted to have you in this because your story was going to be something that people needed to hear, which I'm so happy that you shared with everybody. How did you stay resilient? How did you build back that resiliency? I know you said you came back, you were grumpy. That's to be expected, of course, but how did you maintain hope and resiliency?
I just, for when I got back, I just focused on what the mission was, and I knew that there were other deputies that were put in situations far worse than the situation that some of us were. And many of these deputies, and again, I can't go too much into it, but many of these deputies went from city to city to city to city, and they were gone for months. I was fortunate. I was only gone for just over a month. And I had somebody that could swap out with me, but some of our other specialized deputies, they didn't have that. So for me, it was, I know some of these folks are literally packing up their stuff. They're getting on an airplane, they're getting in a vehicle, and they're driving across the country to the next city. So we just kept doing it for them. Even though I wasn't there and my team had already switched out and we had rotated some people around, we all stuck with it. We all stuck working with those cases. The individual that struck the deputy with the baseball bat, we didn't get him until months after we had all redeployed. But we all kept working it. We kept working with those deputies that were in that particular city as their home city. And we promised that deputy, we're going to get this guy. The plan was, if we could have gotten the baseball bat, we were going to sign it over to him and have him hold on to the baseball bat until the trial, just as kind of a token. But we never located the baseball bat. However, we did get that subject. He was charged, and the last I heard, I think he's either about to go into the trial phase or he's been incarcerated.
Okay, thank you. We have Mary Eggleston, who had her hand up, and I have allowed her to talk. So I don't know if she can. Mary, you want to try to talk? You're gonna have to go off mute to talk.
I'm actually trying to click the button to ask her to unmute to see if she can hit it.
Okay, thank you. And then if she can, she could just type in her stuff. There were a few questions that came up here, though, by the meantime, Chuck. Did your department support you during the riots? We had no department support. Do your job was a mantra. We still have no internal help for people, and I know many struggle here. I think you said that your department stepped up to offer stuff, yes?
Doctor, I didn't hear the question.
It essentially was, did your department support you during the riots? Because there was a feeling in some departments that they were not supported.
At first, support was slow, and I think that as an agency, we kind of got caught back on our heels a little bit, and then the agency picked it up. They deployed our incident management team, a great team of individuals who came out and got folks what they needed. And so at first the support was slow, but then it picked up. And I give kudos to my agency and especially the management in this particular city. They did the best they could with what they had to take care of their staff. So it was slow. To just make it clear, yeah, the support was slow, but it got better, and it started changing the path moving forward in these incidents in the future.
Yeah, and then thank you for sharing that, Chuck. And then Jessica had a question. She said, do you feel like being able to talk through this stuff personally in a forum like this is helpful? Personally beneficial.
It is. It is personally beneficial because not a lot of people hear about the Marshal Service. We're kind of a quiet agency. I know, depending on what your news preference is, it depends on what you saw. So it's good to get this out, and I've talked a little bit about it. I think I drove my wife nuts with it when I first got back. But it's good to have this conversation. I had to go back through it last night just to make sure I was not putting out something I shouldn't say, because my emotions kind of got involved in it. So I had to take some stuff out. I had to change some things, but overall, I think it's good. And again, we appreciate you having us as the Marshal Service to be able to put some of this stuff out there.
Of course, man. Yeah, always. Dominique over on the East Coast, she was asking about potential hydrofluoric acid being thrown on law enforcement. Were there different types of acid and other concoctions that were being thrown that were acidic or fire-based or anything like that at all?
I'm not sure about the acids. I know that there were many incidents where law enforcement that was out pushing these folks back, they were doused in flammable, whether it was gasoline, kerosene. So there was a concern for that, and that changed. I think some of the tactics of pushing out. We tried to get basically the position from a higher ground, to be able to see this stuff coming. The folks that were arrested or during the skirmishes, if they dropped radios, we picked them up. We tried monitoring channels. We started picking up on some of their call signs. They were using train whistles, and it took us a while, but we started figuring out that the train whistles were indications for them to start moving their homemade shields, whether it be to the left side or to the right side. So we started picking up some of their tactics. We did get some intel that most of the shot callers weren't even there. They were, from what we understand, I don't know that we actually have proof, but some of the intel was showing that they were paying homeless folks to be the ones to come up, try to breach, whether it be the front doors, and then later on when the fence was up. So that was kind of disheartening to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what a confusing environment, not knowing who's doing what, and then you are always, as you said, paranoid. And even though you were deployed overseas in the past, it felt like a different type of paranoia, not knowing if you could trust your hospital, not knowing if you could trust people to take care of you because you weren't sure of their intentions, I should say. Lisa asked, did you guys get help from the military at all to be able to help protect the buildings and whatnot?
Not in many of the cities. The particular city that I was talking about today, no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that you had mentioned that local law enforcement had turned their backs on you as well when in certain places that you were at. That must have been a huge rift. I mean, for a long time we've talked about the thin blue line and about how law enforcement sticks together, etc. But really, I think you saw a shift in that when you guys were trying to ask for assistance. It must have felt weird not being able to get that level of help from, people that you classify as your brothers and sisters.
At first it was, and again, in this particular city, working with our deputies that are in that city, they knew that this wasn't being done by the rank and file officers. This was at the higher levels, and it was tough, but we just kept supplying, or at least trying to supply the information the best we could.
Yeah, Chuck, I don't want to put you on the spot for any of these questions at all, but I do think that they're interesting. Okay. Also, one here that had asked about suicides, that there were talks that some folks had died by suicide in service. Do you know if that had gone to that place where people took their lives or had considered taking their lives as a result of the trauma of this deployment?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think we had any of that. I can't say whether or not there were deputies who thought that. I would certainly hope not. We saw a lot of the stressors. I tried to have conversations with them. Again, we had our members of our critical incident response team that were either in these cities or they were calling, checking up on folks. In the particular city that I was in, we tried getting the chaplains and stuff to come in, but there were none available. So we just kind of took on that buddy system, checking on each other every night at the briefings in the courthouse. First question: how's everybody doing? Everybody okay? You just had those conversations.
You were off somewhere else taking care of other people's property, if you will, and then your family was left back home, right? vulnerable and exposed, and you were wondering how bad this probably was going to get in your own neck of the woods. How did you manage that stress of being apart from your family and you know, being a protector to your family as well?
It was tough. At the time, my wife was home. It was tough at first. Very little time to talk. Obviously, during the night, I was extremely busy. Maybe get a couple text messages in here and there, get a couple minutes on a phone call the next morning. And it was just, hey, look, I'm okay. We're okay. We'll be fine. So.
That's probably why you postponed the conversation for when you came back home, right? And then tell her the real deal because you didn't want her worrying while you were away.
Yeah, there was a lot of that, and obviously it's all over the news. Everybody can see what's going on in these cities. You try to play the fear management with your family and your friends. So
yeah, people. Chris asked, you know, what do you think would go differently if you guys were to have a situation like this now? What were the lessons learned, and how would you operate differently?
I think we would deploy people sooner. Now that we've been through this so many times around the country, I think as an agency, we know what's needed and how to get those resources to our folks sooner. We know what to expect. This was a lot of unknowns, especially not expecting hotels to be giving up where we're staying. That was again, we initially went there to develop intel for threats against the courthouse. But like I said, it quickly shifted to, okay, our focus is on our deputies because they're being targeted. And I think for some of us, it was just hard to comprehend that, wow, people are actually doing this. So.
Yeah, you saw some stuff that not a lot of people would see, man. And you know, that is really a unique perspective that you have on this, Chuck. And I'm grateful for your friendship. I'm grateful for you being here today. I know that there are a ton of people inside of this chat that feel the exact same way, which is really cool to see. And I'm just seeing a ton of thank yous, and your story needs to be heard. There are people that are saying that this sounds like you were overseas. It didn't sound like it was part of us being in America, you know, and that is so true. You know, it probably did feel like a foreign place that you were in. It looked familiar, but it was different, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I was in the military. I've deployed to third world countries, and this was something like we've never seen before.
Well, I'm grateful that you're alive to be able to share it, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Travel safely on the East Coast. And if anybody, just stick around if you can and respond to these people in the chat, because I know that there are a ton of things that just really are meaningful comments that people have made. So thank you. Thanks, Chuck. We'll be in touch soon.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Dara. We really appreciate it again. Thank you.
Yeah, brother. See you soon.